Before we start, just a quick reminder to hit that subscribe button. Only 2% are subscribed. At 1,000 subscribers, I'll be posting a special video. He raised his glass and wished my pregnancy would fail. The fork slipped from my hand and hit the plate with a sharp crack. Everyone stared at me like I had dropped something, not him. I am Megan, 29, and that was the second my brain split. For a breath I thought I misheard, that my mind twisted his words. I searched his face for some kind of joke, anything soft or clumsy. He just took a sip and watched me like he had tested a theory. I pressed my palm over my belly under the table and felt everything tilt. My husband broke first with a short laugh that died halfway out. He leaned forward and asked what my nephew had just said, voice too calm. My nephew rolled his eyes and repeated it slower, like we were stupid. He hoped the baby would not make it, because people like us should not breed. My mom whispered his name and grabbed the edge of the table until her knuckles jumped. My sister stared at her son with her mouth open, but nothing came out. I waited for her to shut him down fast to make this stop. Instead, she gave a weak chuckle and muttered that he took jokes too far. That laugh hit harder than his words, I swear it did. My face went hot and my ears rang, like the room shrank around me. I asked him why he would say something like that about my kid. My voice sounded high and shaky, which only made me angrier. He shrugged and pushed his plate away like the food annoyed him. He said bringing a baby into this mess was selfish and pathetic. He glanced at my stomach, then at my husband, like we were irresponsible teenagers. I felt something sour climb up my throat, and my fingers dug into my chair. I told him he did not have to be excited, but he would show basic respect. I reminded him this was his cousin we talked about, not a random joke. He smirked and asked if I was going to cry about it right there. He called me emotional and dramatic, and the word emotional snapped like a rubber band. My husband pushed his chair back with a loud scrape that cut through everything. He told my nephew to stop talking about our baby like trash now. My nephew leaned back and crossed his arms, eyes locked on me, not him. He said he was just being honest, because nobody else here would be. My mom begged everyone to calm down, voice thin and shaking near tears. She said we were ruining a family dinner that was supposed to be nice. I stared at her, stunned that the problem was the volume, not the curse. It felt like watching a fire and hearing someone complain about smoke. My sister finally snapped out of it and told him to apologize already. He laughed, an ugly short sound, and said he did not apologize for truth. He repeated that some people should never have kids because they cannot handle reality. His eyes flicked to my belly again, and I swear I felt my muscles tighten. I asked him what reality he thought he understood better than any of us. He said most kids grow up miserable, so stopping one early was mercy. He said losing a pregnancy could be a blessing in disguise for everyone. The word blessing hit me like a slap, and my chest started to pound. I stood up so fast the chair behind me tipped and bumped the wall. Everyone jumped, and for a second nobody moved, like they were watching a show. I kept my hand over my stomach as if he could reach it from there. I told him not to ever speak about my child that way again. He looked me up and down slowly, like I was overreacting at a bad joke. He said if I could not handle one comment, I should not be a parent. My husband moved closer beside me, not touching me, just standing there like a barrier. I remember thinking I should leave, but my feet stayed locked to the floor. My sister started to cry and said he did not mean any of it. She grabbed his arm and told him to just say sorry and be done. He brushed her off and muttered that everyone was soft and obsessed with feelings. He added that he had every right to have an opinion about breeding. That word breeding made my skin crawl, more than anything else he said. It turned me from shock to cold, like someone flipped a switch we could not flip back. I told my mom and my sister that opinions stopped where my child began. I said if he wanted to talk like that, he could do it far from me. My mom tried to bridge it with a nervous smile that did not reach her eyes. She reminded me that he was young and pushing boundaries, like that excused curses. She asked me to sit back down and enjoy the meal for her sake. I stared at the plates and knew I could not swallow another bite. My husband asked my nephew if he understood what he had wished out loud. He asked if he realized he had basically wished death on an unborn baby. My nephew just shrugged again and said people lose pregnancies all the time anyway. He called it nature cleaning up mistakes, and my vision went fuzzy around the edges. I heard myself laugh, a short, sharp sound that did not feel like mine. I asked if he had any idea what it meant to lose a baby. He did not answer, he only watched me like he was cataloging my reaction. The whole table blurred together, and I felt suddenly very alone in that room. Something inside me settled, and not in a good way, more like cement. I told him he would not be part of my child's life, not after this. You know that instant where you cross a line, and you know you cannot cross back. That was it, standing there with my hand on my stomach and his eyes on me. My sister gasped like I had slapped her instead of him. She told me I was overreacting because of hormones and stress and fear. She said I would regret banning family over one stupid comment at dinner. I told her I would regret ignoring a clear warning sign much more. My mom whispered my name again and told me to think before I spoke. She said anger could make people say things they did not really mean. I asked her what part of his speech sounded like a slip, because I heard none. She looked away first, which hurt more than I expected, and left the sentence hanging. My nephew finally stood up, pushing his chair back with slow, exaggerated movements. He told me I could not stop him from having opinions about anything. He said if I wanted to play victim over biology, that was my problem. He smiled a small, tight smile that did not reach his eyes, and I felt sick. I told him I was not asking anymore, I was making a boundary. I said he was no longer welcome around me while I was pregnant. I added that he would not meet this baby unless something changed in a real way. The room went very quiet, and I heard the clock ticking somewhere behind me. My husband picked up our keys and set them near my hand without a word. That tiny gesture felt like the only solid thing in the world right then. I squeezed the keys and realized my hands still shook, my legs almost did too. I told everyone we were leaving, because I was done being a target at my own celebration. My sister begged me to stay longer and talk it out after dessert. She kept saying we could fix this if I just calmed down a little. My nephew watched with that same bored look, like the drama bored him already. I realized he cared more about winning that moment than about any person at that table. We walked to the door, and I felt their eyes on my back the entire way. My mom called after me that we should not make any permanent decisions tonight. I paused there, one hand on the door, one hand over my belly, caught between leaving and turning back. I did not answer because if I spoke I knew I would scream. In the car my husband asked if I was sure about the ban. The question sat there between us, heavy and real, with the engine still off. I thought about his words about mercy and mistakes and nature cleaning up. I nodded and said this was not a boy who slipped up, this was a boy who meant it. Driving away, I watched the house shrink in the mirror until it disappeared. I knew the fight at that table was only the first round, not the last. I also knew something had shifted in our family that would not shift back. My nephew had wished my baby out of existence, and I had finally believed him. By the time we got home, my phone already burned in my hand. I dropped my purse near the door and opened his profile before taking off my shoes. My husband went to lock up, and I stood in the hallway staring at the screen. I searched his handle like I was typing a crime report instead of a name. I already knew I was not going to like what came up. His picture loaded with some edgy quote about hating people and loving honesty. Under it, his bio had a line about never wanting kids on this planet. Another line bragged about being anti-family expectations with some skull emoji. My stomach clenched because it sounded too close to what he had just thrown at me. I scrolled down anyway because I needed proof this was a pattern, not a slip. The first post I hit was a meme about pregnant women ruining their bodies on purpose. The caption joked that anyone who chose pregnancy deserved lifelong misery and regret. Under that he had written that bringing a child into existence was abuse. My thumb hovered there shaking, and I could feel my pulse in my teeth. I knew then that dinner had not been an outburst he instantly regretted. I kept going because I guess I wanted to see how deep it went. There was a thread laughing at baby photos and calling them parasites with diapers. He had replied that parents were pathetic for needing tiny clones to feel important. Another comment talked about miscarriages like they were corrections, not tragedies, and I almost gagged. I did not feel sensitive anymore, I just felt like someone had opened a drain. I called out for my husband without looking away from the screen. He stepped beside me and leaned in close enough that I smelled his aftershave. I handed him my phone and watched his jaw tense while he read. He scrolled slower than me, like he wanted to make sure he understood everything. When he reached the miscarriage comments, he whispered a curse under his breath. Keep going, I heard my own voice and it sounded flat and older. He tapped another thread where my nephew wrote about breeders being less than human. There was a reply about how society should discourage pregnancy unless approved by the state. He had liked that one and answered that most people were unfit to reproduce. I stared at that sentence and felt a cold line run down my back. Part of me wanted to slam the phone down and stop feeding the panic. Another part thought about my ultrasound photos on the fridge and saw his words under them. I took the phone back and started capturing every screen like it was evidence. Snap after snap stacked up in my gallery while my thumb moved on autopilot. It felt dramatic and paranoid, but I kept going because something in me insisted. My husband asked what I planned to do with all those screenshots. I said I did not know yet, but I was not pretending this away. I told him if anyone tried to say I exaggerated, I would show them this. He nodded slowly and rubbed his face like he was trying to wake up. Neither of us had expected to treat a relative like a threat that night. We finally moved to the couch, but I still could not sit still. The family group chat icon glowed on my screen with a little red bubble. I opened it and saw a new message from my mom asking if we got home safe. Nothing about what happened at dinner, just a cheery line about family drama happens. My chest tightened because even the wording felt like someone brushing crumbs off a table. I started typing, then erased it twice because every version sounded either too soft or too harsh. Finally, I wrote that I was not fine and that the comment about my pregnancy crossed a line. I added that I had looked at his social media and found a lot of similar garbage. My hands trembled when I hit send and watched the message land in the chat. The typing bubbles popped up right away like they had been waiting for me. My mom answered first with a long text about him being young and saying foolish things. She wrote that online stuff is mostly jokes and that I should not take it seriously. She added that he loved me in his own way and never meant real harm. Reading that made me feel like I had imagined the entire dinner and this feed. I stared at the top of the screen and felt my throat close again. My husband touched my shoulder and told me to show them the actual posts. So I dropped 3 screenshots in the chat without any extra explanation. The ones with the miscarriage thread and the unfit to reproduce line hit hardest. For a few seconds, nothing appeared in response, and the silence felt heavier than shouting. I watched the little bubbles blink and disappear and then come back again. My sister finally wrote that everyone rants online and that I was stalking her kid. She called me invasive for digging through his profile like some weird internet cop. She said none of that meant anything because he was venting, not planning anything. I could feel my face heat up while I read that twist in real time. It felt like she grabbed the flashlight from my hand and turned it on me. I answered that I did not care about venting, I cared about patterns. I reminded them that the same ideas had come out of his mouth hours earlier. I pointed out that he was not just posting memes, he was cheering them on. I typed that I did not feel safe around him right now and hit send. Even writing that word about my own nephew made my stomach drop. Mom jumped in with another message begging us to talk this out calmly. She wrote that we should all meet soon and clear misunderstandings face to face. She added that texting made things worse and that emotions were high after dinner. The way she wrote misunderstandings made me feel like I had misheard the word wish. I looked at my husband and asked if I was losing my grip on reality. He told me quietly that he heard every word and that I was not losing anything. He said the posts only proved what his gut already felt at that table earlier. Hearing that helped, but not enough to drown out my family's excuses on the screen. I turned back to the chat and decided to be clearer than I had ever been. If I left room for wiggle, they would pour themselves right through it. I wrote that I did not want my nephew around me during the rest of this pregnancy. I added that I would not invite him to anything related to the baby going forward. I told them this was not revenge or punishment, it was protection. My thumb hovered before I pressed send because I knew this changed everything. Once it left the screen, there was no way to pretend I never drew that line. My sister's answer came back almost instantly, like she had it ready in her head. She wrote that I was blowing things up and letting anxiety wreck the family. She reminded me that he was her only child and that I was attacking him. Then she sent a line that said if I banned him, I was banning her too. That one stung worse than anything she had thrown at me in years. I asked her in the chat if she had actually read his comments about pregnancies. I told her that if anyone else online had written that about her future grandchild, she would lose it. I asked why it became acceptable just because it came from inside the house. Typing that felt weirdly like betraying my own blood, but I kept going. I needed them to stop acting like this was about politeness instead of safety. While I waited for a reply, a notification slid across the top of my screen. It was from the same app, but from a different place, not the group chat. He had posted a new status already about aunties who melt down over biology. No names, of course, just obvious enough that even strangers could guess the setup. My head throbbed because he was turning my panic into content for fun. Curiosity or self-harm, I am not sure which one won that moment. I clicked his post and read comments from his friends laughing about hormonal rage. One wrote that I would probably raise a soft kid and that this proved it. Another joked that maybe my body would reject the mission before it finished. My lungs felt tight and my free hand curled into a fist against my thigh. A direct message from him popped up while I was still staring at that thread. He wrote that if I kept spying on him, I should be ready to be offended. Then another line about truth hurting and that I should toughen up before motherhood. He finished with a laughing emoji and a comment about me being the family cop. I sat there shaking and realized he was enjoying this way too much. I did not answer him, which for me took more effort than yelling. Instead, I screenshotted the messages and added them to the growing folder. My husband leaned over again and asked if he was harassing me now. I just handed him the phone and watched his expression go from tired to cold. He said we were saving everything in case this escalated further down the road. Back in the family chat, my sister finally responded with a wall of text. She went on about cancel culture and people digging through private accounts. She insisted he was just being edgy and that we were trying to ruin his life. She ended by saying if I cut him out, she would never forgive me. I read that last part 3 times and felt something harden in my chest. I wrote one more message and kept it shorter than anything before. I said I loved her, but I was choosing my child over her son. I added that this choice was final and that I would not debate it again. I told them I needed space and that I was muting the chat for now. Then I hit mute and let the silence flood in around me like a wall. My phone still buzzed on the table for a while as more texts rolled in. I did not check them because I knew they would all say the same thing. That I was dramatic, that I was hormonal, that I was cruel. I stared at the ceiling and listened to the vibration like distant knocking on a door. The part of me that used to rush to fix everything stayed very still. Later that night, one last thought kept circling my brain like a restless bird. If I backed down now, they would treat every future boundary as negotiable noise. So I opened the chat again without reading whatever they had sent before. I typed that no one was to share medical updates or baby news with him. I wrote that if anyone ignored that request, they would also lose access to us. I read that message twice, then pressed send before I could soften it. The typing bubbles appeared and vanished, but no new words landed in the thread. For the first time that day, they seemed unsure of what to throw at me. I locked my phone and set it face down on the table beside the couch. Inside, I knew this was only the opening round and they would test every word. My sister texted that they were in the driveway before I even said yes. I stared at the message and felt my pulse jump into my throat. Before I could answer, she followed with, "We're already here, please just open." My husband looked at me over his coffee mug while the bell started ringing. I already knew I was about to regret unlocking that door. I cracked it just enough to see them on the step, side by side. My sister's face was blotchy from crying, his was blank and bored. He had his hands in his pockets like he was waiting for a bus. She launched straight into it before I even moved the chain. "We just want to clear the air," she rushed, eyes flicking to my stomach. I could have shut the door right then and blamed the latch later. Instead, I opened it wider and stepped back so they could come in. My husband stayed by the hallway, not smiling, not welcoming, just present. My nephew's gaze skimmed past him and landed on the framed ultrasound on the wall. He gave a tiny huff through his nose that made my skin prickle. We ended up in the living room because there was nowhere else to go. My sister perched on the edge of the couch like she might bolt. My nephew dropped into the armchair and slouched until his shoulders hit the back. He didn't look nervous, he looked entertained. I felt my hand drift to my belly again like a bad habit. "I'm here like you wanted," my sister started, fingers twisting together in her lap. Her voice shook, but she didn't look at me, she watched him. "We just need to talk about what happened and move past it." I glanced at my husband and caught the small shake of his head. Moving past something is hard when the person who did it looks smug. I drew in a breath that tasted like metal and aimed the first hit. This only works if he actually regrets what he said. I kept my words slow because if I rushed I knew I'd spiral. I need to hear that he understands how serious that was. I waited for even the slightest flicker of discomfort in his face. "Nothing." He scratched his jaw and shifted lazily in the chair. "I'm not going to lie just to make everyone feel better." He crossed one ankle over his knee and stared straight at me. If people choose terrible situations, they shouldn't expect applause. It took half a second for that to land, and then my ears roared. "So this is still a terrible situation to you?" I gestured at my stomach because he refused to name what was growing. "You still think my pregnancy is some kind of disaster?" I heard my voice lift on that last word and hated that it did. My husband leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes on my nephew. "She invited you in to fix something, not dig in deeper." He didn't raise his tone, which somehow made it cut more. My nephew shrugged one shoulder like he'd been mildly inconvenienced. "I'm here because Mom begged, not because I owe anyone anything." That sentence told me everything I needed about his mindset. My sister flinched slightly and grabbed for his arm. "Look, just apologize for the way you said it," she urged. She pushed her hair back with a jerky movement and focused on me. "He's stubborn, you know that, he just has strong opinions." I stared at her, then at him, then back at her again. "You heard the actual words that came out of his mouth," I answered. "You watched me stand up from that table shaking." My throat tightened, but I pushed through it anyway. "And your takeaway is that he just has strong opinions." She opened her mouth, closed it, then went for the oldest card. "Family talks things out," she whispered, eyes wet but hard. "We don't throw people away over one bad night." I almost laughed because that one had turned into an entire online manifesto. He watched us like we were a show he'd seen before. My nephew finally leaned forward, as if he were doing us a favor. "I'm not going to pretend I support something I think is wrong." His tone stayed level, like we were arguing about politics and not my child. "Most people shouldn't be having kids in the first place." He looked at my husband when he said it, not at me. "You keep saying most people," my husband answered, jaw tight. "Let's not play vague here." He pointed between the two of us. "You're talking about us right now in our house." Even my sister flinched at how blunt that sounded out loud. My nephew smirked, just a small twist at the corner of his mouth. "You're both emotional and careless about the future," he replied. "You barely afford your own lives, now you're dragging another person into it." I felt that hit behind my ribs, even though he had no idea about our finances. It wasn't the money jab that bothered me, it was the arrogance. I asked him a question I knew the answer to, but needed him to say. "So in your mind we're unfit?" The word tasted dirty leaving my lips. He tilted his head like he was studying something under glass. "I think a lot of people are unfit to reproduce, yeah." There it was, no disguise, no half apology tucked around it. My chest felt tight, but there was also this strange calm. Like I'd been waiting for the mask to drop so I could stop doubting myself. You know this isn't a debate club, I told him. You wish something horrible on a real baby, not a concept. He rolled his eyes so hard it almost looked rehearsed. I never wished anything that wasn't already a common outcome. He spread his hands as if explaining basic math to a child. Pregnancies fail every day, people just pretend it's tragic instead of natural. My stomach clenched as if he had reached across the room and squeezed it. My sister jumped in quickly, voice panicked. He's not saying he wants that to happen to you, she rushed. He's just coping badly, joking badly, whatever, he's scared for you. That excuse snapped something brittle inside me. He didn't look scared, he looked entertained. Are you scared for me? I asked him directly. I watched his face, every line, every twitch that might betray something. He paused just long enough to make me hope, which I hate admitting. Then he shrugged again. I'm more scared for the kid, honestly. I felt my husband tense beside me like he was about to stand up. I put my hand on his wrist for half a second to keep him seated. If anyone was going to draw this line, it had to be me. What exactly are you afraid of for my child? I pressed. I needed his worldview naked in the room without softening. He rested his chin on his knuckles like this was a podcast interview. Growing up around people who make decisions based on feelings instead of logic. He flicked his eyes toward my belly again. Bringing someone into existence just to meet your emotional needs is selfish. He spoke like he was reciting someone else's script, one he'd memorized. This isn't about my emotional needs, I shot back. I wanted a family, yes, but I'm not creating a pet. My heartbeat pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I'm willing to sacrifice, that's the opposite of selfish. I realized I was defending my right to be a parent to a teenager. He snorted softly. Everyone says sacrifice, then dumps their baggage on their kids. His gaze slid past me to the photos on the shelf and back. Most parents shouldn't have reproduced, they just didn't think it through. That word reproduced coming from his mouth made my skin crawl. My sister grabbed his forearm and squeezed, nails digging. Just stop for 1 second, she begged, voice cracking. Can you please, for once, just apologize for how you express things? She looked at me like she was pleading for both of them. He doesn't mean it as a threat, he just gets carried away. I shook my head slowly because it finally clicked. You're asking him to apologize for tone, not content. I looked from her to him and back again. You want him to keep believing this garbage, just say it more politely. The realization left a bitter taste in my mouth. She opened her mouth to protest, but I lifted a hand and she fell silent. I'm not doing that, I told her quietly. I don't care how nicely he phrases wishing harm on my baby. The room went still while I formed the next sentence. I care that he believes the harm would be justified. He laughed once, short and sharp. You act like I have power over what happens, he scoffed. If something goes wrong, that's biology, not me. He leaned back, looking almost relaxed. You're the one reading it like a curse. Here's the part where I still question myself sometimes. For a tiny moment I wondered if I had blown everything out of proportion. He sounded calm, almost reasonable if you ignored the actual meaning. That's what shook me the most, if I'm honest. The way he could dress cruelty up as logic. My husband finally stood then, slow and deliberate. You don't have to swing a knife for words to matter, he told him. You're telling a pregnant woman that losing her kid might be for the best. His voice stayed low, but each word landed like a weight on the table. That's not just an opinion, that's vicious. My nephew's shoulders tensed for the first time all afternoon. He flicked his eyes to my husband, then back to me. So what, you going to ban me from everything now? He asked. His tone was mocking, but I caught the tiny edge under it. Make me the villain so you can feel righteous. I stood up slower than my heart wanted, but I stood up. Every muscle in my back felt tight, my hands steady on the couch. Yes, I answered. I am banning you from everything that involves my child. Hearing myself say it out loud scared me and steadied me at once. My sister gasped like I had thrown water in her face. You can't do that, she blurted, lurching to her feet. This is my son, he's going to be an uncle. Her fingers trembled as she gestured between us. You don't get to erase him from your kid's life. I met her eyes and wished I could hand her my fear like a physical thing. I get to choose who stands near my baby, I replied. I get to decide who holds her, who talks about her, who jokes about her existence. My voice shook on the word baby, but I didn't back down. I'm choosing not to hand her to someone who thinks she shouldn't be here. She started to cry again, louder now, the kind that fills a room. You're tearing this family apart over internet nonsense, she yelled. He's just parroting stuff he reads, he doesn't really mean it. That excuse made me feel dizzy. If he didn't mean it, why was he fighting this hard to defend it? My nephew stood too now, the energy in the room shifting. He towered a little over me and looked down with that same detached stare. Let us be real, he said, voice low, almost bored. You were never going to let anyone challenge your fantasy. He jerked his chin toward my stomach like it offended him. I stepped back instinctively and hit the coffee table with my calf. My husband moved between us before my brain complete. Ely caught up. The small distance between my nephew and me suddenly felt way too small. I realized then that I wasn't just angry, I was uneasy. Not because I thought he'd attack, but because he clearly didn't care if I hurt. I'm done here, I told them. My throat burned, but the words came out clear. There will be a baby shower, there will be a birth, there will be a childhood. I took a breath and finished it. You are not invited to any of it unless you change in a real way. My sister grabbed her bag with jerky movements, tears streaking her face. You're going to regret this when the hormones wear off, she spat. You're choosing a hypothetical kid over actual blood. The word hypothetical sliced through me in a very particular way. My daughter was already kicking during ultrasounds, and she called her hypothetical. My nephew walked to the door without another glance around the room. At the threshold he paused and looked back over his shoulder. Don't worry, he said, lips curling. If something happens, you'll probably thank me in the long run. That line sat in the air like poison. My husband moved forward, but I caught his arm and shook my head. The last thing I wanted was another scene, especially with me this pregnant. Get out, I told my nephew, each word clipped. I didn't shout, which somehow made it harsher. He smirked once more and stepped outside. My sister followed but turned on the porch. You're not just losing him, she warned, voice raw. You're losing me too if you stick with this. Her eyes searched my face for any sign I'd cave. I held her gaze and let the silence answer. She swore under her breath and stomped down the steps after him. The door clicked shut and the house finally went quiet. I realized I'd been holding my breath and let it out in a shaky rush. My legs gave a little and I sank back onto the couch. My husband hovered close, hands open, waiting for my next move. Looking back, that afternoon was the real break, not the dinner. Dinner was shock, this was confirmation. He didn't trip into cruelty, he stood on it on purpose. I felt my baby flutter and rested my palm over the movement. Right then I knew I would rather lose half my relatives than ignore that warning. The first thing I saw was my nephew climbing out of her car. My whole body went rigid before my brain even caught up. He slammed the door like he owned the place and scanned the parking lot. My sister rounded the front of the car with a big bright smile. For a second I honestly thought I might throw up on the sidewalk. My phone buzzed in my hand while I stared at them. A new text from her popped up. We're here, let's talk like adults. I looked from the message to the actual scene in front of me. She'd brought him anyway, like my boundary was just a suggestion. Please tell me I'm imagining this. My voice came out thin and rough. My husband followed my gaze and his jaw shifted hard. That's them, he muttered, hand already sliding toward my back. I took one step toward the entrance, then turned and walked straight at them instead. They spotted me halfway across the lot. My sister lifted a hand in this cheerful wave that made my skin crawl. He shoved his hands into his hoodie and smirked like this was entertainment. Hey mama, she called, eyes flicking to my belly. Like the last month of messages hadn't happened at all. I stopped a few feet from them and planted myself there. He is not coming inside, I said, no warm-up. I pointed toward the hall doors behind me. I was clear about that in every message. My pulse thudded so hard I could feel it in my gums. She blinked fast like she was surprised I started that blunt. "Can we not do this in the parking lot?" she pleaded. Her gaze darted to the entrance where guests were already walking in. "People are watching, just let's talk by the door." Her hand brushed my arm, trying to steer me like I was furniture. I pulled away and stayed exactly where I was. "If he walks toward that door, I walk to my car." I didn't raise my volume, I didn't need to. I meant what I wrote: he is barred from this event. The word barred felt heavy and final on my tongue. My nephew finally spoke, voice lazy. "Relax, it's just a party," he drawled. He gave my stomach a quick glance, then looked back at my face. "I came to support the miracle or whatever." He pulled a face like even that phrase tasted ridiculous. My husband moved up beside me, close enough that our shoulders brushed. He didn't say anything yet, he just existed there as a solid wall. My sister threw her arms out toward him. "Look, he showed up, that should count for something," she argued. "He's trying, can you meet him halfway?" "Halfway to what exactly?" I took a breath that trembled at the end. "Trying would have started with not wishing my pregnancy failed," I answered. "Trying would have meant not mocking it online after I confronted you." I locked yes with my nephew and did not blink. He rolled his eyes hard, mouth twitching. "You're still hung up on that," he scoffed. "It's jokes, people joke about dark stuff all the time." He lifted one shoulder and let it drop like this was no big deal. "If you can't handle that, maybe motherhood wasn't the move." That line hit harder than anything on his feed. Not because it was new, but because he brought it here. To my day, to my milestone. I felt my fingers curl around the edge of my phone so tight it hurt. "This is exactly why you're not coming in," I told him. My sister groaned and dragged a hand over her face. "He's being an idiot, but he's still family," she insisted. "Are you really going to make a scene in front of everybody?" She gestured toward the hall doors where people were glancing over. "You're going to remember these photos forever, don't ruin them." I actually laughed once, short and sharp. "You're worried about pictures, I'm worried about a person." I jerked my head toward the entrance. "There's a whole room of people in there who managed not to curse my child." My voice shook, but I stayed put. My nephew shifted his weight like he was bored. Then he pulled out his phone and aimed it casually toward us. A little red light blinked on the screen. "Oh good," he murmured. "Let's hear what the internet thinks about being banned from a baby party." It took me a second to understand he was live. "Turn that off," I snapped, heat rushing up my neck. "This is a private event, you do not get to broadcast this." He angled the camera more toward my face and smiled. "Look guys, hormonal aunt is freaking out," he announced. "You know that feeling when the ground tilts a bit?" That's how it felt watching him turn my boundary into content. My husband stepped closer, voice low and sharp. "Point that away from her or I'm taking it out of your hand," he warned. There was no bluff in his tone, and my nephew sensed it. My nephew's grin faltered for a flash. He tilted the phone so the shot caught him and my sister instead. But he didn't end the stream. Comments started blinking up the side, tiny lines of text I couldn't fully see. I caught words like crazy, overreacting, and my chest squeezed. My mom's voice cut through the tension from behind us. "What on earth is going on out here?" she called. I turned to see her hurrying across the lot, clutching her purse strap. Two cousins trailed behind her, eyes wide, staying just out of the blast zone. Of course, the audience was growing right on schedule. I pointed at my nephew's phone without looking away from my mother. "He's streaming this," I told her. "He showed up after I said he was not allowed, and now he's filming." My throat burned, but I made every word clear. This is why I don't feel safe around him. My mom's gaze jerked to the phone, then to his face. "Turn that thing off," she ordered, voice sharper than I'd heard in months. For a second, I thought he might listen to her. He lowered it a fraction, then tucked it closer to his chest. "It's already running, might as well finish the clip," he muttered. My sister stepped between them like she was shielding him from a spotlight. "He only went live because she's being extreme," she protested. If she let us in, none of this would be happening. She pointed at me like I was the one who'd crashed someone else's event. She's making a circus out of a misunderstanding. I caught my mother's expression in that moment. She looked torn, eyes moving rapidly between us. Can everyone just breathe for a minute? She pleaded. We have relatives driving in, we have food, we have decorations. Her voice wobbled on that last word like she already knew it sounded shallow. I spoke directly to her because arguing with my sister felt useless. I'm at the boundary I said. I'm not sharing this celebration with someone who has wished it would fail. I nodded toward my nephew's phone. And clearly he's still treating my life like content. My nephew snorted quietly and looked down at the screen. Chat says this is insane, he announced. They think banning relatives over thoughts is authoritarian. He smirked again, eyes flicking up to mine. Congratulations, you're going viral for being oppressive. I stepped forward before I could overthink it. Look at me, not your little audience, I told him. If you don't walk away, I involve security and the police if I have to. My chest heaved, but I held his gaze. I am not playing with you anymore. Something shifted in the people around us when I said police. My cousins exchanged glances and took a half step back. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My sister's face twisted like I'd physically punched her. You'd call cops on your own nephew, she demanded, voice cracking. Yes, I answered without flinching. If he refuses to leave a space where I've barred him, yes. The words burned coming out, but they fell. True. I'm pregnant, I'm hosting, and he's harassing me on camera. I felt my baby nudge inside like a small reminder of who I was protecting. My husband touched my elbow, grounding me. We can get the manager, he murmured near my ear. They made you put names on a guest list, remember? He started toward the hall without waiting for approval. I watched my nephew's eyes follow him with a new tightness in his jaw. You're really going to embarrass yourself even more, my nephew called out. He shifted his stance, phone still angled upward. Everyone will think you're unhinged. He laughed softly under his breath. Perfect content, honestly. I turned to the cluster of relatives by the doors. If anyone thinks this is reasonable behavior, you're free to join them, I said. I won't stop you from leaving with them. The group rustled, some looking away, some staring at the asphalt. The silence after that felt heavier than the arguing. My mom reached out and grabbed my wrist gently. Please, let's just let him come in and sit quietly, she urged. He promised me he'd be on his best behavior today. She spoke like making a promise to her erased months of bile. And we can deal with the online nonsense later. There it was again. Later. Later we'll talk, later we'll deal, later we'll fix. Later had done absolutely nothing so far. Later is how we got here, I told her. My sister's eyes filled again, but the tears looked angry now. He stepped up by coming, she argued. That's more than most teenage boys would do. She glared at me like I spat on a gesture of peace. You're punishing him for trying. Trying would have started with deleting that garbage and apologizing, I shot back. Trying would be ending that stream right now and owning what he did. I jerked my chin toward his phone. Instead, he's farming your meltdown for views too. She froze, then slowly turned toward him. She finally seemed to notice the little flood of comments. What are they saying? She asked, voice thin. He angled the phone away from her. Nothing you need to see, he replied. His thumb skimmed the screen, obviously enjoying the flood. The manager stepped out of the hall then, walking straight toward us. My husband was right behind them, face set. Is there a problem at the entrance? The manager asked, calm but firm. I felt every eye swing their way like we'd hit a spotlight. My heart pounded so hard I thought they could see it moving under my dress. I answered before my sister could spin anything. We have someone trying to attend who is not on the list, I explained. And he's recording guests without consent. I pointed directly at the phone. I've asked him to leave repeatedly and he's refusing. The manager turned to my nephew, expression neutral. We don't allow live filming of private functions in the lobby, they stated. I'm going to ask you to end the broadcast and step away from the doors. My nephew's mouth tightened, but he didn't move. You serious right now? He scoffed. My sister jumped in, voice rising. He's her nephew, she argued. He's not some random intruder, he's supposed to be here as family. Her hands flew as she talked, bracelet jingling. She's just upset and overreacting, we can handle this ourselves. The manager kept their focus on my nephew. Is your name on the guest list the host provided? They asked. He glanced quickly at my sister, then back at them. No, but that's, he started. They lifted a hand to stop him. If the host doesn't want you here, you can't be here, they said. Right now you're disrupting the event before it even starts. They nodded at the phone again. And I need you to shut off the stream or take it off our property. For the first time he looked unsure. He looked at me then, just for a heartbeat. Like he was checking to see if I'd soften now that authority stood here. I held his stare and gave him absolutely nothing. The manager waited, arms folded, not backing down. Finally, my nephew sighed loud and exaggerated and jabbed at the screen. Fine, stream S done, he muttered. He pocketed the phone with jerky motions. Happy now? His tone made it clear he meant the opposite. Everything in him radiated resentment. I forced myself to hold steady. Leaving would make me happy, I answered. You're not welcome today. My voice went quiet on that last word, but I didn't swallow it. I meant every syllable, even if it burned. My sister stared at me like she didn't know me at all. You're throwing him out like trash, she choked. On the day you're supposed to be celebrating new life. Her face twisted, grief and fury mashed together. You're going to regret this for the rest of your life. I felt my baby shift again, a small roll under my palm. I'll regret letting him near her more, I replied. Remember that when you replay this in your head later. I stepped aside and gestured toward the parking lot. You both need to leave now, or security will escort you. The manager gave them a polite but firm nod toward the vehicles. We'll give you a minute to decide, they said. Then turned and walked back toward the doors. My husband lingered behind them, arms crossed, eyes on my nephew. The balance had shifted, and everyone knew it. My nephew scoffed and shook his head. This whole thing proves my point about you, he muttered. He took a step backward toward the car. Enjoy your little echo chamber in there. His gaze flicked to my belly one last time, unreadable. My sister didn't move yet. She stood rooted, breathing hard, tears streaking. You want me to choose? She asked softly. Because that's what this is, you versus my kid. Her voice cracked on that last word. I hated that she framed it that way. You're the one who brought him knowing my boundary, I answered. You chose to test it, I'm just enforcing it. My throat felt raw, my legs shaky, but I stayed upright. If you walk away with him, that's your call. She stared at me a long moment, searching. Whatever she hoped to find wasn't there. Then I guess I know where I stand, she whispered. She turned sharply and strode back to the car without looking back. My nephew shot me a crooked little salute and followed. They climbed in, door slamming louder than necessary. My mom took a shaky step toward them. Wait, can we at least talk after this? She called. Neither of them answered, or if they did, I didn't hear it. The engine roared and the car pulled away faster than it needed to. Silence dropped over the little crowd around us. One cousin cleared his throat and mumbled something about traffic, then slipped inside. Another aunt gave me a quick side hug and muttered, "You did what you had to." My mom stayed rooted, eyes shiny, watching the car disappear. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. She turned to me finally, voice faint. I wish it hadn't gone like that, she murmured. I swallowed around the lump in my throat. I wish he hadn't given me a reason, I answered. We both knew that wasn't the whole truth, but it was all I had. The manager held the door open, and guests began filing through again. I forced my lips into something that almost resembled a smile. Thank you for coming, I told people as they passed. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. Every empty space in the lobby felt like a person choosing the other side. Inside the hall, the music played and chatter slowly picked back up. I caught flashes of pastel wrapping paper and plates in people's hands. There were a few obviously vacant seats near the front, chairs my sister had claimed. Seeing them empty twisted something deep in my chest. I sat down anyway when they called me over. "Do you want to cancel this?" my husband asked quietly. He rested his palm on my shoulder. "We can send everyone home, nobody would blame you." I looked at the faces that had stayed, at the people watching me carefully. They were waiting to see if I would crumble. I shook my head slow but firm. "If I shut it down, they win twice," I whispered. "They ruin the boundary and the day." I placed my hands on my lap to steady them. "We're doing this for her." So I started opening gifts with a tight throat and a practiced grin. People clapped and laughed at tiny outfits and gadgets. I responded, thanked, made jokes where I could. But my eyes kept snagging on those empty chairs near the front. Every glance was a fresh reminder of the price tag on my decision. At one point, my phone buzzed on the table next to the cake. A friend had sent a screenshot from the stream before it cut. My nephew had managed to post a quick clip with a caption about control-freak pregnant relatives. The comments were already stacking underneath, strangers picking sides on my life. I locked the screen without reading more because I knew it would poison the rest. You know what's weird? I still laughed for real twice that afternoon. Once when my husband's aunt gave me a ridiculous parenting book as a gag. Once when my best friend made a joke about our kid inheriting my stubborn streak. Both times the laughter felt like a small act of defiance. By the time people started saying their goodbyes, my face hurt from holding it together. My mom hugged me tight and didn't let go for a long moment. "I love you," she murmured into my hair. "And I love that baby, no matter what mess surrounds all this." I clung to that sentence like a rope. Later, after we loaded gifts into the trunk and the hall was quiet again, the crash finally hit. I sat in the passenger seat and stared at my reflection in the window. My husband reached over and squeezed my hand until my fingers stopped shaking. "Proud of you," he said simply. That was the sentence that finally made me cry. Looking back now, that doorway is what I replay in my head. Not the cake, not the decorations, not the awkward games. Just the parking lot, the phone held up, the car pulling away. That was the moment everyone chose where they stood. And I chose my daughter, even before she took her first breath. 2 hours after I posted her first photo, my phone buzzed nonstop. I was propped up in bed, baby asleep on my chest, half dazed. I thought it was the usual flood of hearts and congratulations. Then my screen lit with a message from a friend that just said, "Check this right now." She had attached a screenshot of his profile. My daughter's face sat there under his username, cropped from my post. He had written a caption about another achievement unlocked for the human livestock. My throat tightened so fast my next breath came out as a choke. I zoomed in even though I knew what I was looking at. My hospital bracelet was still on in the picture, her tiny hat visible. Underneath, strangers were dropping laughing reactions like it was a meme. I stared until the words started doubling, then forced myself to actually read them. One comment joked about spawning without thinking of the consequences. Another wrote that kids born to normie parents never stand a chance. Someone else added that at least the child might fail early and escape this mess. I felt my arms tighten around my baby without realizing I'd moved. I took 3 screenshots in a row with shaky fingers. My husband glanced over from the chair and frowned. "What happened?" His voice came out low, already wary. I handed him the phone because my tongue felt stuck. He scrolled once, then twice, his jaw clenched so hard a muscle jumped. He looked from the screen to our daughter and back again. For a second, I thought he might throw the phone across the room. Instead, he inhaled slowly like he was bracing for impact. "That's your picture," he finally managed. "Your whole account is private, how did he even get that?" I remembered how my mom had begged to share the shot in a side chat. And I knew exactly how that image left my hands. I pulled up my messages with her, heart hammering. There it was, the single photo I had sent their way. I had trusted that it would stay inside that small circle. Apparently that trust lasted about an hour. I typed with my thumb while he still stared at the post. "Did you forward my baby's photo to him?" I hit send before I softened the question with anything polite. The message sat on delivered while the seconds stretched. While I waited, I opened his entire post instead of just the screenshot. He had pinned it to the top of his profile with a smug little note. Proof my aunt ignored all the warnings and bred anyway, it read. My stomach twisted hard, and I tasted acid at the back of my mouth. More comments kept appearing while I watched. One asked if he'd taken bets on how long she would last. Another wrote that sometimes nature fixes mistakes in the crib. I had to set the phone down because my hands started to shake too much. Here's the part that makes me feel crazy when I think back on it. For a few seconds I wondered if I was overreacting because I was exhausted. I had gone through labor, I had stitches, I was running on fumes. But then I looked at that tiny face against my chest and the doubt evaporated. My mom's reply finally popped up. I'm so sorry, I just wanted him to see his cousin like everyone else. She added that she had assumed this meant the fight was cooling down. My vision blurred, and not from the surgery meds. I typed back slower this time. I told her I had not changed my mind, I had not lifted anything. I reminded her I had asked everyone specifically not to send him updates. Then I forwarded the screenshot of his caption with my daughter's face under it. It took longer for the next answer to arrive. When it did, it felt like a punch wrapped in apology. She wrote that the caption was disrespectful, but he was just being edgy. She suggested I ignore it and focus on the joy of the birth. Ignore it. Ignore strangers joking about my newborn dying early. Ignore my nephew using my child as bait for his angry corner of the internet. I stared at the word until it blurred. My husband reached over and gently took the phone again. Stop reading for a second, he murmured. Look at her, not at thems. He rested his other hand lightly on my shoulder. I did look at her. Her tiny mouth twitched in some newborn dream, completely unaware of any of this. She didn't know her first appearance online came with people wishing she would disappear. Something in my chest hardened in a way that felt new. I asked my husband to open my nephew's profile on his own device. He did, thumb already moving faster than mine could. Screenshots, I reminded him. He nodded and started capturing everything post by post. There were new stories too, quick clips where he talked straight into the camera. In one he smirked and said, "Yup, she went through with it anyway." He called my baby genetic back. Age on a world that didn't need more. He laughed and asked his viewers to drop predictions for how twisted this kid will grow. I watched those with a kind of detached disbelief. Like my brain had stepped a half-inch out of my skull to survive the viewing. I kept expecting to wake up in the hospital and find it was all anesthesia fog. Instead, my incision ached, my baby breathed warm against my chest, and the feed kept rolling. I blocked him from my account even though he'd already stolen the picture. I locked down everything again, every setting, every list. It felt like putting new locks on a door that had already been forced once. I did it anyway because doing nothing felt worse. My mom texted again, shorter this time. I had no idea he would post it, I promise. She added that she would talk to him, get him to take it down. That line made me angrier than anything. I answered that this was not her job anymore. I told her I would be handling it myself from now on. I wrote that sharing my child with someone who had wished her away was a violation, period. Then I asked her directly not to send him any more photos, updates, or details. She responded with a single line. I hear you. I wanted that to comfort me, but it felt vague and fragile. Like a promise written on tissue paper. Once my daughter fell back asleep after feeding, I opened a different app. I looked up harassment laws and online threats with one hand. My husband watched me search and didn't try to stop me. If anything, he looked relieved that I was thinking about protection instead of appeasement. The next morning, after another round of posts from him, I called a lawyer. My voice shook on the phone when I described the situation. I expected them to tell me I was being dramatic and this was just drama. Instead, the person on the line asked me to email every screenshot I had. By afternoon, we were sitting in a small office while my daughter slept in her carrier. The lawyer scrolled through my folder of images, face getting flatter with each swipe. Has he ever shown up at your home uninvited? They asked. Not yet, I answered, but he already tried to crash one event. They nodded slowly and clicked something on their laptop. What we have here is a pattern of demeaning speech tied to your child, they explained. plus at least one comment that could be read as anticipating harm. They pointed at the one about nature fixing mistakes in the crib. My stomach lurched hearing those words spoken out loud in that room. I suddenly felt ridiculous for ever wondering if this was all in my head. "Can I keep him legally away from us?" I asked. The question sounded desperate even to my own ears. The lawyer didn't sugarcoat it. They said getting a restraining order usually required more tangible threat or physical attempt. But they also said documenting everything now was smart if things escalated. And they offered to send a formal warning letter about the posts if I wanted to. I glanced at my husband. He raised his eyebrows slightly like the decision was mine to make. Part of me wanted to hit every possible button and burn the bridge completely. Another part remembered he was still technically family and hesitated. In the end, I agreed to the letter. It would spell out that his online behavior was unwanted, harmful, and could be used later. It would demand he remove content involving my child and stop posting about us. Hearing it laid out that way made this feel less like family drama and more like a file. Walking out of that office with a sleeping newborn and a potential case felt surreal. This was not how I pictured postpartum when I saw those two lines on a stick. I thought about sleepless nights, yes, but not because I was watching my nephew's feed. I found myself gripping the handle of the carrier a little tighter in the parking lot. That evening, my phone buzzed with a text from my sister for the first time since the shower. It started with a photo of my daughter that my mom had apparently just forwarded. Then a line under it, "She's beautiful, I miss you." For a second, I let myself just feel that. Then the next message came. "We heard you threatened legal action against him. What are you doing?" She followed it with a longer one, accusing me of dragging outsiders into a family matter. She wrote that I was intentionally trying to wreck her child's future over jokes. I sat there on the couch, baby asleep on my chest again. My husband watched my face carefully as I read. "Do you want to answer?" he asked quietly. I nodded because silence never stopped an argument in this family. I typed slower than I wanted so I didn't just spit rage. I told her I had gone to a lawyer because I felt unsafe and unprotected. I said the posts about my child were not jokes to me. Then I sent a screenshot of the worst comment thread under his caption. Her reply came fast. "She shouldn't be on the internet then." The words made my vision swim. I had posted a single photo on a locked account. I answered that I had the right to share my child with trusted people. I pointed out that our mom forwarding that image to him was already a broken promise. I reminded her that he, not I, made it public bait for his followers. Then I wrote the sentence I knew would blow everything up. "He is never meeting my daughter." I pressed send before I could dress it in softer language. The second it left my screen, I felt something settle in my chest. Not peace exactly, but a kind of harsh clarity. Her response came back as a string of angry lines. She called me cruel, controlling, vindictive. She accused me of punishing her by cutting him off. She insisted he was just talking and that I was turning into a tyrant. I reread her words twice, then set the phone face down. "You okay?" my husband asked. "No," I admitted, "but I'm done arguing about whether my kid deserves respect." Saying it out loud felt like shutting a door. Over the next week, my nephew dialed things up instead of down. He made vague posts about relatives who weaponize babies for attention. He never used my name, but anyone following the saga could connect dots. Friends kept sending me screenshots even after I begged them not to. One night there was a story where he talked about parents who need tragedy to grow up. He looked straight at the camera and said sometimes the universe hands them a lesson. He added a winking emoji at the end that made my skin crawl. That was the moment I decided I would call the police if he ever showed up near us. I messaged my mom a final time about it. I told her plainly that if he came to my house or the daycare later, I would dial 911. I said there would be no warning conversation at the door, no quiet chat in the driveway. He would leave in a squad car or not at all. She responded with a crying emoji and a line about things going too far. I agreed, just not in the way she meant. She asked if we could at least keep things open for the future when he matures. I stared at my sleeping newborn and thought about how many years that word covered. I told her no. I said if he changed in a way that looked like actual work, we could revisit. Not because he was family, but because everyone deserves the chance to grow. But I also said that until then, her job was to keep our details away from him. A few days later, someone rang the doorbell hard and fast. My heart jumped into my throat instantly. I peeked through the peephole and saw a car that looked way too much like my sister's. My hand actually hovered over the lock before I forced myself to check twice. It was a grocery delivery. The driver shifted from foot to foot, glancing at the camera above the door. I opened up, signed, and made some awkward small talk. But my pulse took a long time to come back down. That little scare told me something I didn't want to admit. He had gotten in my head badly enough that strangers on my porch made me flinch. I hated that level of control more than anything he had posted online. It made me double down on the distance instead of easing up. The lawyer's letter went out a week later. I know because my nephew posted a blurred screenshot whining about legal threats from breeder relatives. He mocked the wording and told his followers that censorship had come to his doorstep. What he didn't post was that he took down the photo of my daughter within the day. That removal did not earn him anything back from me. If anything, it proved he knew exactly how wrong it looked in the first place. He could comply under pressure, he just refused to out of basic decency. That difference matters more than people like my mom want to admit. Right now, as I'm writing this, my daughter is asleep in the next room. The house is quiet except for the white noise machine humming softly. My phone is face down on the table, but I know there are unread texts. My mom asking for updates, my sister probably firing off new accusations. I'm tired. Postpartum tired, sure, but also tired in my bones from this whole saga. I grew up believing family would at least agree on keeping babies safe. Apparently that was naivety I didn't know I still had. So here I am on Reddit, because strangers feel safer than my own relatives. I've laid all this out as honestly as I can without doxing myself. The dinner, the social media garbage, the baby shower door, the post with my newborn. And now the lawyer, the letter, the permanent no. My final line to my family is simple. He will not be around my child, not as long as I breathe and she depends on me. If he ever steps near our home or her school in the future, authorities get the first call. I know what that sounds like when blood is involved, trust me. So I guess this is my question to you. Am I drawing a necessary line in the sand here? Or am I really the monster they say I am for keeping a man away fro? Am a child he once openly wished out of existence? Because I will live with being called harsh if it means she gets to live.